Jacqueline Phillips here with Radical Real Estate Matters. I am here with Rick Linnell of Linnell and Associates. He actually handled the case for the deal that made me want to start a YouTube channel and kind of provide some of the out-of-the-box creative ideas to get deals to the closing table that may have never found its way there if it didn't have people that were either really willing to work hard or maybe just a little bit out of their mind. So, thank you so much, Rick. That was, we're just going to refer to this as case number 2 of specific performance because this is going to be in Con Ed this year. If you are taking Jack Waller's Con Ed with NCI, you can find it in the book for specific details. We obviously can't give you any names, we can't give any city locations, we really can't give too much detail, but we can say that the house caught fire.
Yes, thank you, Jacqueline. So the sort of the overview facts are purchaser signs an agreement with a seller, binding contract. The property has a purchase price of $315,000. It's an acreage parcel, so the land is quite valuable, but the house is nice, and it's an area that has gone up significantly in value in the last 20, 30 years. Purchase agreement signed, inspection takes place, and a fire actually happens before the closing. And the purchase agreement used by the purchaser had language that I don't always see. And it specifically said, and I mean, without that language, I can think I know what I'm doing, and I do, but knowing what you're doing doesn't mean you win. It just means you understand the facts. And the language in the purchase agreement was critical. And it was critical because the language in the purchase agreement said that if the house were damaged between the time of the purchase agreement being signed and the closing, it was the responsibility of the seller to repair the property and deliver it in the same condition it was at the time the purchase agreement was signed and the inspection took place.
And that was our maintenance clause.
Exactly. And if the damage was sufficient enough that an insurance claim was made, that the buyer had the opportunity to terminate the purchase agreement and say, I don't want any part of this, or to step into the shoes of the seller, meaning they could accept the insurance award. They still had to pay the purchase price, but they would get that cash, and they could purchase that way and then repair the house, do as they see fit. Normally, you would anticipate repairing the house. So the fire happens, and there is an insurance award. But at this time, the buyer doesn't know that. I represent the buyer, as does Jacqueline. And so we're not sure there's insurance. You presume there is, and that's a fair presumption, but that's not always the case. And to add, this home was free and clear. So there would be no loan that would require that there be insurance. Approaching the seller said, I don't have to tell you anything. The purchase agreement is terminated, the house burnt down, it's over with. Well, Jacqueline understood that the seller can say that, but that doesn't make it so, and that doesn't mean that the law supports it.
It's not how contract law works, quite simply.
Exactly. And so there was a little more pushing to see if the seller might cooperate or if their realtor was able to get them to cooperate, and it suffices to say the answer was no. And that's when I was contacted.
And in my office, I was taught that he who hires Rick Linnell first usually wins. Because Rick is really only going to take a case if he feels like there's a strong merit there that, they have a leg to stand on.
Yes. Now, we have taken cases where people have lesser positions, but we make sure we let the person know you have a weak position. Sometimes people want to move forward, and that's fine. So in this particular instance, I said, you've got this language. Great job, Jacqueline. Client, be thankful. You've got this, because many purchase agreements don't have this language, this very specific language about the insurance, and that's what was key. And I said to the client, look, I'm going to try and reach out to the seller, who at that point had their own attorney, and I'm going to explain to them how I see the law and the cases that I think support our position. Hopefully we can wrap this up. And the general response from the attorney representing the seller at that time is, we don't have to tell you anything. If you want, you can sue us. But if you sue us, we'll countersue you. And we have nothing else to say. That was a pretty abrupt response. I suggested to the client, let's file a claim of interest. And that's a document recorded in the chain of title that prevents the sale of the property to anyone else. And we filed a lawsuit. Now the seller switched attorneys to a more sophisticated attorney, and I'm thinking, well, okay, this sophisticated attorney, they know what the law says. There's probably insurance proceeds, but they don't want to tell us because it's probably a big number. And I reach out to the new attorney, and the new attorney effectively says the same thing. You have no right to know if there's insurance. You have no right to know if there's insurance, how much the insurance award is. You have nothing, and oh, by the way, the contract's already terminated because the closing date has long since passed, and you're committing slander of title by filing the claim of interest. And I said, I'm not going to make this real long, but you really think that we had to write out that we actually get to know if there's insurance? Even though it says we get the insurance proceeds, we actually had to add an extra step that said we have to have the ability, or not that we have to, but we would have the ability to know if there's insurance. It had to be written out, and it's not, so we don't get to know. And the person said, that's right, Rick. Well, we went to court, and the court said, that's not correct. We are correct. And that means that when you have a contingency that is for the benefit of the purchaser, the seller doesn't get to dictate the terms of it. The court said, and I'm paraphrasing, that for it to have all the verbiage that was being claimed at that point by the seller's counsel, that we would have turned a purchase agreement into a 50-page document. And the court said it's clear. If the buyer gets to know about the insurance award, then they get to know first, is there insurance? The court forced the seller to divulge if there was insurance. They said, seller says, yes, there is. I said, okay, how much is the insurance award? They said, we don't have to tell you that. I said, the court just said in a written order that you have to tell us. The person said, we don't have to tell you. We file another motion because the lawsuit's still going on. And finally, they backed down. The insurance award, I believe, was $329,000. Now, in case that's not obvious, if you recall earlier, the purchase price was $315,000. So the award and the land, I mean, it got scorched, but it was just fine. It was still valuable. It existed. The house itself, it had been demolished. And what came out in court is that the amount of the demolition was, I think, about $16,000. So there was a small difference of maybe a couple $1,000s between the purchase price and the insurance award. Well, our clients, they said, yeah, I think I would like that property. He said, for $2,000, I get to have a 5-acre parcel in this very desirable area. They didn't even need a real estate professional like Jacqueline to tell them, yes, we want to do that. Said to the seller, we're going to buy the property and we're going to use the insurance proceeds. And the seller said, no, we're not going to do that. I said, we just won in court. You saw what happened. They said, well, we don't have to sell. They said, we'll give you $50,000 to go away. Well, my legal bill wasn't $50,000. It wasn't even close to $50,000. But remember, what's on the table is pay $2,000 and get a 5-acre parcel. And I think, Jacqueline, you told me that the parcel might be worth somewhere in about $175,000 range.
At that time.
Yeah, just as dirt with no house, which there was no house at that point. So you can imagine what the decision was. Take $50,000, and I think at that point maybe they'd paid me $10,000, so net $40,000, or pay $2,000, get a lot worth $175,000. Yeah, you owed me $10,000, so you have about $163,000 in equity. That was a no-brainer. So we filed another motion, and just before the court heard it, the other side finally agreed to sell. And what this shows is that, first of all, contracts are enforceable. But it also matters what your contract says. All contracts are not the same.
So true.
And I can understand even from a real estate professional, seasoned professional, they look similar. I mean, and certainly to the unsophisticated, to the regular buyer or seller, they look very similar. There aren't real appreciable differences.
Well, and if you don't know your own contract, you won't know if something's different. So that's one of those things where, realtor friends, please know your contracts front to back. The 2 clauses that saved me were the maintenance clause and the risk of loss clause.
They were huge. And as I already said, many purchase agreements do not have this risk of loss and or maintenance. Now, maintenance is more common, I'll say that, but the risk of loss, very uncommon. And in this situation, which granted, this doesn't happen that often, but when it happens, you are an absolute hero. I mean, but for you using that agreement, the seller, strike that, the buyer would have gotten their earnest money back and be on to search for a new home. Now they're sitting on $165,000 out of nowhere. Now, I don't know if they sold the lot. I don't really know what happened with it. But I can tell you this, regardless of whether they built a new home, sold it, or still holding it to this day, it was a win no matter what they did. And without that contract that you used, never happens.
Well, I'll say, Rick, I think it took both of us to get this to closing, because even if I had the best contract, I had to have the right person fighting for my client. So thank you so much for taking care of them. And again, if you're in Jack Waller and Rick's NCI class, you will find this under specific performance, case number 2. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.